dear listeners. Welcome to episode 4 of Closing Night Theatre Therapy, a podcast hosted by me, Susie Wrong, theatre critic at susiegoc.com, and my co-host Nate Edmondson, composer and sound designer. As always, we will be talking not only about what we see on stage, but also the shenanigans that happen backstage, always aiming to gain special insight from the very clever people who make the magic happen. This week, we place our focus on Dead Cat Bounce by Mary Rachel Brown, a play about addiction, or more specifically alcoholism, and how relationships are sustained or destroyed in the process of recovery. We will be speaking with 2 women from the production, actor Lucia Mastrantone and stage manager Michelle Sverdloff. But before we do, we'd like to thank NIDA for the sponsorship of our recording studio and acknowledge traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. Nate, you worked on that luscious music and sound for Dead Cat Bounce.
I did.
Is the script always the first thing that inspires you when working on a new show?
Definitely. It has to be. The script is sort of sacred. So when you're approaching a design, it's always got to be at the forefront of your decisions. And it kind of dictates the energy and the momentum that you have to pick up on. Yeah, so with Dead Cat Bounce, the script was absolutely the starting point. And also Mitchell, the director, Mitchell Butel, was great in that he'd done a lot of forethought as to what he wanted from the score. And he came to me with a lot of tracks of existing music that he was really interested in sort of emulating the feeling of. So that was a great starting point that you don't always get.
Do you prefer working on things like sound effects, or do you just like composing music? Which is your preference?
I much prefer writing music. Yeah, I find that a lot more exciting because it's a lot less obvious and practical. It's a bit more abstract. You've got to think outside the box.
But can I trouble you to get us some sound effects for what's about to follow?
I think I could put something together. Yeah, why not?
Here we go.
Previously on Closing Night Theatre Therapy.
Good morning, Kuntz. I have a new case for you, perhaps our most dastardly and dangerous one yet. You'll be needing a poncho.
Ew.
Oh my God. They're doing West Side Story
with an all-white cast. They're monsters.
If you want to infiltrate the production, you're going to need me. To get in unseen, you'll have to be overlooked, underpaid, underappreciated, but somehow also the hardest working and most relied upon people in the building. You'll have to become stage management.
Luckily, I look fabulous in black.
But you're not Puerto Rican.
But I'm fiery and vivacious. Isn't that what really counts?
The name's wrong. Susie Wrong. I'll take my frock back now, asshole.
You're too late, Kuntz. And now for my secret weapon. Gratuitous fireworks. Activate the launch sequence.
It was you all along.
We will find you and we will stop you.
You're our last hope.
A trans-Asian theatre critic and a bisexual composer? You disgust me!
But I'm white.
Oh, that's okay then. But you, Susie Wrong, don't you know where you are? This is opera!
This is 2019!
No!
Today's guests are 2 vivacious ladies who have just completed Mary Rachel Brown's Dead Cat Bounce at Griffin Theatre, a tale about alcoholics and the people who love them. Hello, Lucia Mastrantone.
Oh, hello.
Hello, Michelle Sverdloff.
Hello.
Do Australians drink too much?
Yes.
Yeah. I'd say that's generally like a pretty, people generally agree to that statement, I'd say, that Australians do like to drink a lot.
Yeah.
Is that what the play is about, do you think?
I think it's, this play is probably not quintessentially just about an Australian addiction problem. I think it's more about addiction in itself, in a universal sense. But Australians, I totally agree, Australians do the culture of you having to go out and having to, no matter where you are, it's about having a drink as much as any sort of reunion. It's really interesting. My sister-in-law just gave up drinking, and it's changed her life because she just says she now will only go to pubs that have a non-alcoholic beer. So people don't ask her too many questions about why she's not drinking, and she didn't have a problem with it. She just said, I just don't want to do it anymore. I don't like it. So but this play is basically about people that have all sorts of addictions. So drink is the main sort of through line, but then it's about addicted to love, addicted to saving people who are addicted.
So that's how you saw your character.
Yes. Yeah. So I think the character I played, Angela, was someone that was addicted to being the saviour and sort of like being able to change someone. She was addicted. Her love was her addiction for this man. But at the end of it, it was about her care that she could change and she could save someone, I think was how I played it back to myself.
Is it very different from your own beliefs about relationships?
Totally.
Okay.
She had way more patience and way more grace and way more like I just have none of that. So the way I was drawn by Mary Rachel Brown was so beautiful, and she had so much, this character had so much kind of love and patience and maybe lack of care for herself. I'm just way too selfish, I think. I just couldn't deal with, I can't deal with my kids asking me for too many, where's my socks, Ma? Where's my lunchbox? I go, I'm really bad at that. You guys figure it out. I can't do that and be a human being. So I'm not, by instinct, I'm not someone, if someone's not being responsible or, sticking to what they say, I have no saviour complex.
So as an actor, do you like that she's so different from you?
Yes. I love it because it helps me to understand people like that, and it helps me to take it out of myself and go somewhere that I'm not normally. So I am building a character rather than just being myself, because sometimes the hardest thing is when you've got a character written and drawn that's exactly like you. You find it. I find that way more exposing than when I go, wow, this is such a fascinating human. Oh, how weird to be like that. So, yeah, it's much easier.
Is it hard to avoid passing judgment on characters when you're playing someone who does have those flaws and that you can't identify with?
Yeah, it is really hard. But because this character was so compassionate and sort of felt quite like a sort of heroic, there was something really heroic about her. I didn't judge her in a negative way, but there are characters that are different to you that you have to, your absolute responsibility and job as an actor is to never judge, obviously, that's 101, and to just literally put yourself in that situation and honour what the writer is making you tell, what story that writer is getting you to play. So,
did you start seeing that saviour quality in other people as you started working on it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And as soon as I read it, all of the flashes of my friends, all of these faces that are my friends that are like that have had relationships, really problematic relations, they just flooded through me.
Were they all women?
Yes. Yeah. They were all women. But because there were also some female friends that had problems also with having children. There's, a couple of my very, very close friends that I love so much have had really very similar lives. And so I kind of felt like I was a very vampiric, if that's a word. Wow. I was just drawing so much from that information that I had, that I lived through these beautiful women that I loved so much, and I watched them so many times. And some of the things that I said in that play to one of the characters when I told her to get out, the new lover, I kept wishing I had the ability, that's used to get me every night, that I couldn't say it to two of these beautiful women that I loved the most. I couldn't actually say those words. And, and I said it in a play, and I said it to a stranger, but I couldn't say it to my own very close friends. So,
when I was watching it, that was how I felt. I felt like, oh my God, I wish she wasn't that way.
Yes.
And I wish that, and I felt like, oh, why did they create a woman like that for the stage? But at the same time, I knew exactly who that person was.
They exist.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of them, and they're usually your really close friends or family, and it's you just watch, you keep watching, and that's why it would be hard. I completely agree with you. I found it hard because I could feel judgment sometimes from women going, you're an idiot. What are you doing?
Get
out of it. What are you, nuts? Totally. I could feel that judgment, and you just go, but it's all people's weird, perverse understanding of what love is and lack of love for themselves.
We often hear it referred to as injured bird syndrome, that idea that a relationship often has that imbalance where someone is becoming the de facto carer for the other person. I think that's quite common. I think everyone in the world almost has found themselves on either side of that dynamic at one point in their life.
Yeah, and what the sad thing is that usually, like, you know, maybe different into this story, but the sort of intimacy and the sexuality of those relationships often goes because no one wants to have sex with their mother or father.
Exactly.
You know, so that's what I find is really like the intimacy always gets stripped away because you are, you know, cleaning someone's bum, you know, metaphorically or, you know, literally. I don't know, Michelle, sorry.
That is so fascinating. That's such a great observation.
Yeah.
Like when you allow yourself to be a mothering figure or something of that nature, and then suddenly what initially started as romance becomes something else.
Yes.
But then because it's the same people engaged in this partnership, you kind of hold on to this relationship as if it's what you always intended it to be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And I think people keep waiting for the reigniting of of that same feeling that never kind of comes back because
It sounds like you really know what you're saying, Lucia.
only because I've lived through it with very close people that I just kind of love so much.
Do you think it can be fixed?
I think that something major has to happen, like seriously major. Like someone has to live through I don't want to wish sickness or anything, but they have to. There's something has to be like almost like a baptism by fire of something has to really pull people up.
Because that's the thing about relationships, is that you just kind of go on this one tangent.
Yeah.
You just kind of go at what feels comfortable, even though it might be really painful.
Yes.
It's just something that you're familiar with and you just keep doing it.
Yeah. It's,
Which is precisely what, Angela? Was that your character?
Angela, that's exactly what she did until that thing happened where, you know, she, in this story, basically, he'd lost all sense of humanity, that he could see that his partner was so distressed and in pain, and because he was so drunk, he lost his human instinct of...
It's like the last straw for her.
Yeah.
Right. Michelle, no, that was... an actor's perspective of the show, being sort of working on that one character inside the play, but you would have seen the play more than anyone else, being the stage manager of the production.
Yeah.
What do you think is the show about?
I kind of agree with a lot of what Lucia said, and I think it's interesting talking about the addiction, and not just the addiction to alcohol, but the addiction to relationships and the addiction to love feeds into what we were kind of just talking about, because the other thing with Angela's character is she's actually also really quite strong, and like she does stand up for herself, at least in the scenes that we see in the play. But she's still, even though she kind of rationally knows that his behaviour is awful and she's not afraid to tell him that, she's still got this like underlying connection to him that she can't let go of. And it's kind of, I think that's something that I've obviously observed happening a lot in these kind of relationships that you are in or see outside of like in real life, that people, no matter, even if they rationally know that these are bad signs or there's red flags, people still get into these situations. I think that maybe is sort of the crux of it. So there's the addiction, to the alcohol and the physical addiction, but there's also that, which is something that's really, I think, very relatable, I guess.
Was it hard for you, Mish, to watch us going through that every night?
It's quite, both of the shows that I've done at Griffin, so I also stage managed The Almighty Sometimes last year at Griffin, which was also like, which was about mental illness and medication of children. So I'm like, can you guys put me on a comedy next time, please? This show was funny in some aspects, but it was also, dealing with some pretty serious stuff. It can be, I guess, quite tolling watching that, but I think also you watch it so many times that you get to the point where you're just not even thinking about it anymore. I'm just kind of
that's what I'm curious about. Like, how do you remain engaged with the show and critical of the show as well as essentially the de facto director's eyes on the production whilst it's in season? Because sometimes, and you're touring a show for months and you're seeing hundreds of performances. How do you stay on top of it and not relax and get kind of caught up in how the show might evolve and resist that and kind of be critical of it?
It is really challenging because, it gets to a point where you kind of, it's quite hard to stay engaged. And that's also the time when you always like make mistakes, is when I like become too comfortable with the show and I'm like, I know it so well. And then I'm like, oh, I didn't do that thing like I was supposed to do. Because you are obviously like at Griffin, for example, I'm operating both the sound and the light. So I'm like doing stuff throughout the show, but I'm also observing it. And I guess part of the responsibility is you're feeding back information about the show to the creatives and the director, who maybe only come and see it a couple of times after opening. And you know, that you're kind of their source of communicating how the show's going and what's happening. So you do kind of have to still remain engaged and be an observer.
So how often does that communication loop happen?
You send like show reports every day. And then also, so basically after every show will kind of send out a report about all the things that happened tonight. And also, you know, you're just, I guess like one of the main things that a stage manager does is they're the communicator between all the different parts of the team. So you're, you know, feeding things back to the producer and back to the creatives, and you're also looking after the cast and making sure everyone's okay.
What are your hours for a production like that, for example? What time do you start and end?
So it depends. Obviously, during rehearsals, it's a different story because you're often rehearsing kind of during the day. And then once we get into the show, like I would usually get there about 4 or 4:30 and then leave at like 9:30 every night, but it's 6 nights a week, and then you do a matinee on Saturdays and some matinees on Wednesdays. So it ends up being like, you know, a 40-hour week probably, but stretched over kind of 6 days. So yeah, you're part of the thing of being a stage manager is that you're always sort of the first person there and the last person to leave, which is, you know, fun. So you end up, it is quite I guess, tolling, exhausting.
It must take a very specific personality who's drawn to that job.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
So take us through from kind of the beginning of the process for you, where you're brought onto the show. What do you go through as a stage manager typically?
Okay, well, it's kind of hard to define like what a stage manager does because it does differ so much depending on the production that you're on. So on the like scale of the production, the scale of the company, and also just on the specific requirements of that play. So, I mean, if you're working on a big commercial musical, there might be a team of like 7 stage managers or something who all have very defined responsibilities. But for a company like Griffin, which is really small, it's just you and you're doing like all of those things, which still exist and are still things that have to be done, but there's just one of you instead of 3 or 4 or whatever. So you're basically there from day one, and you're in, you know, sort of in rehearsals, making sure that everyone's got everything they need, setting up the room, and then you take all the notes during rehearsals, notate all the blocking, so as in like where the actors stand, when, and what they do, and then you kind of do all of the props as well. So make sure it's kind of the designer and production and stage management work together to make sure all of the props are there, and then tracking them and things like in this one there was a lot of wine, so I had to make a lot of fake red wine every night and stuff like that. So you're kind of there for all the rehearsals, making sure everything sort of that needs to happens. I guess once again that being that communication person, that's because you're the only person who's always in the room, who's not creatively involved in the show, who's not the director. You're kind of looking for all of the pieces of information that all the other people need to know in order to make the show happen. And then once you go into the theatre, it also becomes about the technical requirements of the show. So at Griffin, because it's just you, once again, I also operate all of the lighting and the sound. So you'll be like...
not just lighting and sound, right? Dead Cat Bounce had a few other unique qualities you had to operate?
Yeah. I had like... had a like pulley system that covered things, the exit signs, so that we could have a total blackout in the show. So at the top of the show, I was like holding a rope, feeling like a sailor or something. You then also become responsible for that, and also just all of the little things like washing all of the costumes every night, mopping the floor.
So given the level of engagement that you've got with a production, and particularly as you said on a production of this scale, where you are creating props and you are effectively making creative choices as to, you know, what the color of something's going to be, what a food item is going to be made of, you know, even what kind of wine glasses can we find at the op shop or in the prop store to use for that show. Given that level of engagement, and also given the increasing popularity of stage managers being utilized almost as part of the ensemble, appearing on stage in costume to kind of fill out large crowd scenes, particularly for some of the larger scale productions around town. Do you think that they deserve a more prominent credit? Because often you're sort of buried at the back of the program. You're not listed alongside the other creatives all the time. Do you think that really it is a creative role?
I think it's creative. I think you have to be creative as a stage manager. I think that it's more creative in a supportive way than it is in a leading the creativity of the show. You're kind of more there to support all of the other creatives. But in that process, you do obviously end up having to be quite creative.
And I think it's something that Mish is really good at, and all the really good stage managers are the same, is that they still have a dramaturgical head going at the same time as being very practical. So, there was things that you said that you could read into situations that were creative. They were creative opinions.
I think that's especially true in a new work as well, because you're still we were still redrafting the play up until, we didn't have the final version of the script until opening night, really. So you're kind of also tracking that, and there are things like timeline things.
Yeah, so you were amazing. Mish was always going, but this happened in the day. So in the night, so it is like a continuity person on a film set. Mish has got that ability to kind of constantly be looking at the realities of things.
It's almost an assistant director, really.
It is. I think, well, you certainly were, Mish.
Well, I think once again, that just depends on the production and the team, because sometimes if you were working on a bigger show, you'd maybe have a dramaturg and an assistant director, and you'd have maybe more people doing those roles. But when it often just is you, the cast, and Mary, the writer, was in the room, but she was in and out. And so you're kind of the only person who's consistently there and is also somewhat objective in the room, I suppose, because you're not. That's
a good point.
You're not attached to any particular part. You're kind of an overarching. And Michelle Sverdloff, who was the director of this, was quite great in that he did seem like he often would ask my opinion about things. And I know when Nate was showing, or have we even mentioned that Nate was the sound designer?
Yes, we have.
Great. When Nate was showing him pieces of music, he'd ask what I thought and stuff, which happens sometimes and it doesn't in others. It just depends on the room. But I think often because you are always there, and if you have a good connection with that director or whatever, you will kind of develop that relationship where you are being asked to give feedback or you're helping with creative decisions, even though they're not technically your responsibility.
As someone who does a role doesn't get acknowledged the way that the other people in the production get acknowledged, does that bother you? One, does that bother you? And two, where does your sort of motivation come from? Because it's like you've done all this work and no one even noticed.
Yeah. No, it is true. It's an interesting question. I was even surprised to be asked to come on this podcast. I was like, what? Why do you want to talk to me? No, which is lovely. It's lovely to be asked. But yeah, it's interesting because it is very behind the scenes, and it's not something that is really, I guess, acknowledged in the same way as it is for the writer or the director or the cast. But I think that's also sort of true of people like sound designers and stuff as well, because you're acknowledged in a creative way, but people often, it's the things that you don't actually see and that you're not kind of consciously thinking about as much as these are the people right in front of me whose faces I'm looking at who are telling me this story. So I think, and there's also the producers and the marketing people, and there's whole teams of people who work really hard to make these things happen, who, aren't acknowledged in that same way. But it doesn't really bother me that much, to be honest. But I think that's kind of the beautiful thing about theatre, is that it's everyone working together to make this thing happen. And there are lots of different elements that go into that. But I think it can be frustrating at times, but also it's one of the really rewarding things about it. And I guess I enjoy being that person who supports and facilitates that, because I'm not someone who ever really aspired to be a director or an actor or anything. So I'm actually that is really fun and satisfying to me, and I like that I just get to go to work and my workplace is like a rehearsal room and it's fun, and I'm watching people or helping and facilitating people make cool art.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
So, Lucia, I was doing a little bit of research into your career for this podcast, which was really exciting and I always love doing. And I discovered something I didn't know anything about that I was really curious to ask you about. So in the earlier days of your career, you were part of an Australian-Italian bilingual theatre troupe called Doppio Teatro, based out of Adelaide.
See.
Yes.
Yes.
And that made me think about a question I wanted to ask, which is how much has your Italian heritage influenced your career? And has it ever been a barrier, you think, in terms of getting cast, and particularly when you were a younger actor starting out?
Oh, great question. Thanks, Nate. I think it's changed so much in the, 30 years now, my God, that I've been working. Like in the beginning, this theatre company, Doppio Teatro, was an incredible apprenticeship because at that time it was in Adelaide, because I was an Adelaide born and bred girl, and Don Dunstan, who was an incredible premier of South Australia at the time, poured lots of money into non-English speaking background artists because he was really culturally so switched on, and he was an artist.
That's amazing. You can't even imagine something like that happening
He
now.
Was incredible. He was phenomenal. So
imagine Gladys doing that. No.
Well,
Not going to happen.
do you know what I mean? Like it's just they're just like light years apart in terms of his sensibility. So then it was so much more. There was just so much more money for the arts. Like I don't know. Like I don't know if it's the same in New South Wales. I don't know.
I think South Australia used to have a thing where they would give kids money to go and see theatre.
Yeah.
Like there was a program where they'd literally be like, here's $200
no idea they were
or
so
whatever.
progressive with the arts.
I grew up on a diet of incredible theatre. Like my knowledge it was so expansive because we had the festivals and then we'd have workshops usually with the people, the artists and like incredible. We were just given so much.
That's such a strange thing that's happened to Italian people and Greek people because you are culturally so into it anyway, making theatre, telling stories.
Yes.
And somehow when you come over here, it's all died out.
Yes. So because there was a huge Italian community, Greek community, Vietnamese community, Korean community, he just poured all this money into any students or like drama students or into theatre companies that were focused on cultural storytelling. And this company, Doppio Teatro, came out of that with this incredible director, Teresa Crea, who's now become like a hugely renowned academic and speaker about cultural diversity in the arts. But she basically started this company and we had funding to get master teachers from Italy and, voice coaches from England and this incredible apprenticeship. And it was all about making work and devising work and being, having the power to write your own stories. It was they were all new works. And that gave me this belief that you can create out of a piece of lint, you can create beautiful storytelling to people that do speak your language or don't speak your language. So because the whole notion of these companies were to use your language and English together to storytell. And so, sorry, to kind of come back to your question, Nate, the reason why I got that was because I could speak my dialect, which is a dying dialect. It's almost non-existent now in Italy. It's Neapolitan, but it's a Neapolitan from the 60s, which was time capsuled in Australia by the migrants, is what I was taught. And then I learnt Italian, standard Italian at school, and then, of course, I spoke English. And so the only reason why I got into this company was because of that Italian being completely – it was only because of that I got into that. But then that became a bit of a backlash because – from then on, after being with this company for 5 years, I was only employed from other major companies like State Theatre Company of South Australia and because I was specifically kind of given roles that had the exotic sort of either the prostitute or the old Italian grandma. So I never played my age, for many years. I was either really small, like the small child, or I was like, this old woman, or I was, prostitutes or something exotic, or the other woman. I was, and it was specifically because they were looking for something exotic or Italian. And that was for the first, I don't know, maybe 8-10 years of my life, and all the film auditions. I got lots of film auditions because then film was starting to be exciting and looking at stories about different cultures. But that was in the 80s and 90s. And then there was a patch, I think, in the early 2000s where I think it was all shifting, and people were trying to cast, colourblind casting. But it's taken so long for that to sort of really hit. And now I feel like I get cast for my energy as opposed to my culture and the way I look. I think, the way I look in the sense of the energy, it's an energetic sort of thing rather than, she looks Italian or she, in fact, like now I feel like people sort of go, oh, you're not diverse enough is what's happened now.
Yeah,
so
right.
I don't tick, I was told by a theatre company general manager, that I don't tick the diversity box anymore. And which I kind of went,
Isn't that interesting?
I wasn't sure to be happy or sad. But what's beautiful, I think, is that essentially like people, they are employing you for something that is outside of your sexuality, outside of your culture, outside of, and it's about what you make or what you express and give off that people connect to. And I don't know, I think it's, no, I feel really proud of Australia that we're trying to get our heads around it, even though we are really behind it in terms of, if you compare it to the States and England in terms of English-speaking countries. I think Australia's getting much better, I think.
But that's it. That's the other problematic thing, going, it's still
It's
ethnically
sort of.
diverse.
I know.
It's near enough, right?
It's
olive
sort
skin.
Of. She might as well be.
That's
The
a bit
amount
more
of
fucked up.
roles, the amount of like Turkish roles I've gone for, I have. I swear to God, Northern Indian. I was
can
like,
believe it.
Northern Indian. You guys are mental cases.
Oh my God. Lucia, all those years when you were ticking the diversity box
Yes.
and sort of typecast a lot,
Yes.
what prevented you from giving up?
Because this is going to sound really pretentious. I think I'm built to do this because I started so young, and I think lots of artists feel the same, is that you don't choose it chooses you. I know it sounds really like wanky and it sounds very cliche, but it is vocational. And I think because I started with that company that is about make your own stories, tell your stories, tell the ones that you have this burning need to express. And that company really formed my my spirits. I never feel I get down if work isn't coming or the work I'm getting is a bit shit, and I'm getting crappy kind of roles that I go, oh God, I'm doing that again. But I can always, I know in the back of my mind, I can always make stuff. I can always write stuff. I can always wait for the right job because I can teach. So I teach people movement and I've got skills to teach, and that keeps my artistry working. I just think I'm built to do it, I
have to admit, I was ignorant of your physical theatre background until I was doing my research.
Are you blind? Have you seen her body?
Well, I know. In retrospect,
bless
and
you.
Having seen the graceful shapes that you pulled in up in the south, it all makes sense. But I didn't realize that you had that background and you had that history with companies like Legs on the Wall and Sean Parker and company, which is really exciting. So you teach students?
I teach movement and yoga, and I've always had. I trained as an actor, but I've always had a very strong connection to dancing and physical. But being thrown around. I was never a trained acrobat or anything like that, but I was malleable and physical enough to be able to train specifically for certain roles, which is what the job was with Legs. Because I also came from working with incredible acrobat company called Acrobat with Simon Yates, who is internationally renowned for his work, and he trained me specifically to do this. It was Romeo and Juliet, but completely silent movie style, called Verona, and it was an incredible piece. And it ignited all of my abilities of dance and whatever. And I went, oh, this is another path, because I do find it frustrating just doing a year of just text. I get hungry to do physical work, but physical theatre as opposed to dance. I don't have that skill by any means, but I have the skills to be able to combine forms.
That's such a pleasure when we watch you, whatever you're playing on stage, that your body is alight.
Oh, thank
like your
you.
fingers and your toes and everything. There's so much energy.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So I'd like to ask you, what kind of advice do you have for younger actors who sort of are trained for the close-up, it seems sometimes?
Yes.
They're only acting with their mouths and their eyes or something, and the rest of their body is just dead on stage.
I would get lots of, if you want to be on stage, get lots of driving time on stage, because nothing teaches you, like if that's where you want to go, or if you want to be purely a film person, still get your skills on stage, because you can always turn it down. And ultimately, working on stage teaches you, it's about acting. It doesn't teach, you can modulate it and you can turn turn it down. But if you don't understand how to feel stuff in a big scale, then I don't know that some people say it doesn't translate. Some people say they're just film actors, and other people say, oh, they're just theatre actors. But I think acting is acting. And I think if you know how to feel stuff on stage, you have to feel it and show it. You have to sort of make the shapes of it physically. But I think if you know how to do that, I think you can. I don't know. I don't do enough film. What do I know? I'm talking crap.
Do you think there's much of a difference between performing on really large-scale pieces in large theatres? So take something like Harp in the South, where you're part of a really big ensemble, versus something like Dead Cat Bounce, where you're in a very intimate space and you're very immediate to the audience. Is there a difference to how you have to approach that as an actor?
Totally. I mean, I feel like I call like Griffin Theatre, because it's so intimate and there's so much scrutiny, because we are so, like, the audience is so close to us. I call it like the Iron Chef of theatre, because there's so much, like, it's like I had to change how I kissed someone, because I could feel that, because I'm supposed to bite him and he's supposed to react to my bite, and I could feel audiences when I didn't have my mouth open and then shut at the right time. Audiences go, like they knew I was lying. So you have to be really precise, and you just have to feel stuff and show it less. Because if you're showing, whereas on the stage, like the Ros Packer, you have to feel it all the way to make the right silhouette. Whereas here, it's almost the silhouette can be a little bit, just lower in terms of the shape of it. So you definitely think, but you still have to be connected. No matter even if you're like doing something in a concert hall, I think people, they just smell it when you're not quite.
That is so nice to hear, because sometimes I imagine, because the theatre is so big, like at Ros Packer, I'm thinking, I wouldn't know if you're faking it.
Oh, right. Yeah, right. Because it is, and the Ros Packer's really, when you're up in the gods, it's very disconnected, isn't it? It's not a really conducive space. No, I think you have to always.
Yeah. But it's different. Like you were saying, the connection comes from the unified presence of all of those people on stage. So you're not looking necessarily at one person, You're looking at a much bigger picture, which is why you need that kind of insane level of precision that shows like Harp demand, and why we spend so much time drilling those scene changes and those big moments to get them just right.
Because you have to be so precise as a cog. You have to and you have to deliver. Like, even if your character comes on and just says something like 2 lines, that is setting up the picture, the big picture for the next bit of storytelling. So you have to make sure that you come in with and match the energy, which is big in those situations. As an ensemble, you have to make sure you leave the ball in the right place.
So, Michelle, We were talking about diversity earlier, and I want to ask you a question because stage management as a discipline is really interesting in that it's one of the only examples of a discipline in theatre making where women dominate over men.
Yeah.
Do you think that this reflects something that's actually quite problematic and old-fashioned in terms of gender roles, that women are managers and are the kind of the shopkeepers, as it were, of theatre making? Or do you think it's a positive thing?
I don't know, honestly. It's a really good question. And I have heard that statistic before that it is mainly women and also mainly young women is like really young women are like very much the majority in stage management. And it is interesting because I mean, I like the course that I did a theatre course out in Bathurst in New South Wales. So it was just like a general sort of theatre degree. And I think we had 3 guys in our year, like it was 95% women probably. And then you go out into the industry and that's not actually reflected in the industry, which is quite interesting because it's like, how are there all these women who are going and studying theatre, but then, you know, you go into the actual professional world and it's not the same.
Absolutely.
I don't really know why, you know, stage management is predominantly, I mean, part of me wants to just be like, maybe it's because women are just really great at multitasking and managing people, which is like, you know, something that is, I don't know. It's very possible, but yeah.
Yeah, I find it really interesting because that is exactly your impulse. You kind of go, oh, well, you know, women are better multitaskers. Women are more organised and more disciplined than men. But then you catch yourself and you go, well, actually, is that just another gender stereotype that I'm just reinforcing?
I think women are taught to hide from the limelight. We are told not to be too loud. We are told not to be heard.
I guess it's interesting what you were saying earlier today about ego and about not being able to have an ego. That's kind of interesting as well because it's like, well, maybe that's something that we teach women is that having an ego is a bad thing.
That's
but
right.
we maybe don't.
And at the same time, we teach boys that you gotta have that ego.
Yeah, true. It's something that I haven't thought about overly before, to be honest. But yeah, it is a really interesting question.
So as the person that has to deal with some of the more bizarre aspects of putting on a show, from wrangling small children, animals, making prop food items and bizarre things work on stage and dead man pulley systems and all that.
I've never had to look after an animal,
thing.
but I want that to happen.
Don't you worry.
Like, please.
It's only a matter of time. They're becoming more common, I feel.
Yeah.
We'll get one on the next show for you.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
What are some of your more memorable stage management stories? Because you get to see warts and all what goes on into a theatre production.
Yeah. I suppose I've worked on quite a lot of sort of non-traditional stuff and like interests. So I've done a few kind of weird shows. I haven't really ever done, like I've never worked for the Sydney Theatre Company or anything, so I'm kind of more used to the small weird things than the like big productions. So I've done like a show in a toilet, which actually Chamber Pot Opera are opening their Sydney Opera House season this week.
I didn't realise you did Chamber Pot Opera.
Yeah,
that's great. I saw it in Edinburgh. It was fun.
I was stage managing in Edinburgh, so you would have walked past me as you entered the tiny toilet.
I cannot believe. What a missed opportunity.
Yeah, so they're doing a season at the Sydney Opera House now. But yeah, that's like one of the weirder ones I've done, I guess, where you're literally like operating the show from behind a wall. And we had to do like in the one in Edinburgh, actually. So it's an opera set in a women's bathroom. But the toilet that we had was like a male toilet. So we had to we turned the urinals into seats for the audience. So like building a structure to turn the urinals into seats, but then they would still do that flushing thing occasionally, like in the middle of the show. Like just ignore that. So I've done some weird ones like that. I worked on a show last year actually at Vivid that was a giant inflatable puppet that walked around at Barangaroo. It was called The Liminal Hour, so a company called Earth. So that was a crazy one. Like, yeah, I guess that's the thing I was saying with stage management before is it's so hard to define because you're like what you're doing as a day-to-day is so dependent on the show and you can be in a, you know, traditional theatre where you're sitting up in your box at the back and you're operating the lights and the sound, or you're like walking around in the rain like with an iPad that controls the arm movements of a giant inflatable puppet. Like, and both are really cool and fun for different reasons. But yeah, I guess I've been fortunate to work on some cool stuff and some different stuff, done some like site-specific things. I did a show on a railway station once. Always some interesting things. Keeps life interesting, you know?
Well, it's interesting when you think that stage managers began as actors historically. You know, the actors were stage managers and vice versa. That's where that role sort of originated from. You were part of the ensemble. And now I think in recent times, we're seeing a return to that almost. We're seeing stage managers engaging in productions in ways that is much more performative as camera operators on stage, as members of the ensemble, you know, in costume. It's really interesting how that we're starting to stretch the definition of what that role is a little bit more. Do you think that's as we get more ambitious with our theatre making and as we get more scope with our technology and with what we can achieve, do you think that there's a tendency to over-rely on the goodwill of stage managers?
I think there's a tendency to over rely on the goodwill of stage managers in general, yes, because the definition of the job is just doing anything and everything that needs to get done in order for it to happen. And so I think that it can be very easy for people to take advantage of that and sort of, I've been pretty lucky in that I haven't had many negative experiences.
So does that mean that the SM needs to know how to say no? But at the same time, your job description is kind of, you have to say yes to everything.
You kind of have to. And I think maybe Nate and I had a conversation about this in like when we were doing Tech Week for Dead Cat Bounce about even just purely the hours and what your expectations are of a production team, and not just stage managers but production managers and designers and the crew compared to what we expect of performers. There's a little bit of a discrepancy that in the industry in general, that's not down to specific companies, but that is something that's accepted, that when you kind of look at it, you're like, oh, is this right? Like, I mean, you know, there are a lot of rules with actors that are great, that, you know, about having a certain amount of breaks and only being able to work a certain number of hours. And people work really, really hard to make sure, people like stage managers work really hard to ensure that they always get a break. Meanwhile, you know, you haven't had a lunch break in like 5 days and you've worked 70 hours and you're not going home anytime soon. Like it's kind of a bit like, where is this?
That doesn't sound right.
No.
Yeah, it's a bit, and I know Nate's, you know, been a part of, like, I think has been talking a little bit about this in terms of composers and sound designers and the amount of work that goes in that is not, you know, necessarily reflected in the conditions that are given back.
So why hasn't there been a formalized culture around that?
Well, I think, to be honest, it comes down to the fact that there isn't enough money in the arts, and the art survives off people working really, really hard. And you wouldn't, like, if you tried to apply the same rules to stage managers, for example, as you do to actors, the show would not happen. Like, it just wouldn't, because you have to be there before and you have to be there after, and the things have to get done.
The reverse of the situation is what you see if you go and make theatre over on Broadway, where it's highly unionized.
Yes,
but it's actually gone the reverse direction, where it's so inefficient. We've got someone who's employed for a full evening of work whose job is literally to walk on stage at interval and pick up one particular prop and move it, and no one else is allowed to do that. And they're very militant about it, but it's completely inefficient. But of course they've got the money, and that's been established enough that culture can exist. Whereas here, I think, as you say, we have limited resources, and our ambitions are increasingly outstripping those resources.
Yeah, I think it's a really big question, and I don't think anyone has the answer to it. But
also in terms of theatrical unions, I think in Australia, unions are run, they're operated, they've historically been driven by performers, and so they struggle, I think, to understand the requirements of representing other departments. But what you do see, like at SDC, for example, the stage management department there is almost its own internal union. So they internally, and specifically to that company, they negotiate conditions, work conditions, contract conditions, things like that. Periodically, you know, every handful of years or so, they renegotiate. So there's almost like a miniature union within the bubble of that particular company, but it's not common at all to find.
Well, I haven't come across that, but I'm also still like fairly early in my career, and also just I'm kind of happy to be working in the arts and don't really, you know, I'm in a position where I can do that and I can work those hours and it's fine, and I don't have like, you know, kids or anything like that to stop me from doing that. So it's okay. But I know that's part of the reason why, you know, stage managers are often really young, is because it's not a career that is particularly good if you are like, or it could be really challenging. Same with acting and stuff if you had, you know, a family or a mortgage, because it's not consistent, and the hours are, you're going from, you know, being in rehearsals and doing 9 to 5 Monday to Friday or whatever, and then going into doing 3 months of working 6 nights a week, and it's all very.
Does that mean that your support comes from your personal life and not from the industry?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I actually enjoy all of those elements of it for me, because I'm someone who likes change, and I like having like life being interesting. So I'm like, I don't really like the thought of going into an office 9 to 5 every day and being in a locked-on contract for 2 years. That's like, it's terrifying to me. So I'm like, it's fine. But I also can see objectively that it would be a hard thing to maintain for some people, or for, people in later stages of their life. And there's not a lot of like career progression, like unless you go into kind of more arts management, production management roles for companies. It's kind of, you get there and then there's hardly any like, full-time stage management roles for companies that exist. They don't really exist. So you're kind of stuck in this loop, I guess. There was a really interesting QUT actually recently did like a panel discussion with a bunch of stage managers where they talked about that in a lot more articulate way than I am now, where, they had an entire conversation about why stage managers are so young and why it's not something that is a career with a lot of longevity.
Well, often stage managers, of course, graduate up to becoming company managers, and from there they often go on to producing, which segues nicely into talking about your next project. So you're actually doing a similar thing, right? You're producing your next show?
Yeah, so I'm producing the next show that's on the 25A season, so Downstairs Belvoir. So it's called The Extinction of the Learned Response. So it's a new work by Emmy Hoy. So she's a recent NIDA writing grad. So that's super exciting.
When does that open?
So I think we're 7th of May.
In May. Great.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty cool. It's kind of about 2 scientists and their subjects in a kind of experiment, and the whole thing is set in an underground bunker kitchen. So it's a bit like, it's going to be pretty weird and crazy and cool. So that's super exciting.
Yeah, very exciting.
Lucia, I know you're taking a break at the moment.
I am taking a break.
But if I were to ask you, what is this dream role for you? What would that be?
I think at the moment I'm kind of giving myself some space to, like probably most actors say, to write stuff, and kind of the dream role is, I think, to, look, there's so many dream roles, but to write something about, my family and my, and Italian migrants of a certain time, and because I feel like this story is kind of it's been heard a lot, but often it's through through gangster stories and as opposed to hardworking people that had lots of dysfunction because of denying their identity. And so I guess my dream role at the moment is anything to do with telling stories that are important. They're the dream roles, the ones that I'm losing a bit of love for, redoing Shakespeare's stories, because I think we have got so many amazing things to talk about at the moment in the world. The world is at its most fertile in terms of storytelling, and I'm not quite sure why we're looking to those stories anymore. So I'm kind of not really interested in doing those roles anymore. I could get a call for Taming of the Shrew to do Kate, and I go, sure, I'd love that.
Of course you would. We'd love to see that.
But that would be a dream role. But at the same time, I go, there's a better version of that story. Taming of the Shrew is an amazing concept, and there's 70,000 versions of that, like with honour killings and all of those sorts of stories that we should be talking about at the moment. So I guess now, things have come up this year that I have gone, I don't think I want to do it, because I'm now going, my dream roles now are stories that matter to me and matter to the world, my world, maybe.
So have you actually started writing something?
I have started writing something, and it's been in the cook for about 8 years. Wow. So I'm sort of like, and shown it to some people and a bit scared and to kind of, and I don't know whether I'd be in it or not, but it's just, the stories are about something that is really important to my culture and to my family and to lots of migrants and migrant children that, you kind of grow up and you kind of generation, and class jump like really quickly, and that gives you a certain schism, I'm goat herding people like just one generation ago. And here I am sitting doing a podcast, and had a huge education and have class jumped. And, it's in lots of migrant kids have experienced that, and their families. You can see the imbalance of what happens in your families when things like that happen. And
because that's all happening now, isn't it? The migrant story.
Yeah.
Because this migrant jump, this generational jump, where migrant children are only starting to participate in the creative arts.
Yes.
Like you would be a bit of a frontliner, like a trailblazer.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. Like it's unheard of in my family, in my community, for any person, any woman particularly, to have left home unmarried, touring internationally as an actress. Like I was a putana, which is a slut. That's what my community branded me as.
Yeah.
And it took them 10 years to accept me again.
Yeah.
And I had to literally run away with the circus before and make some sort of money and income and kind of, buy a little apartment or buy a little house to go, look. And as soon as they went, oh, she's not on the streets, they kind of got their head around it. But it took a long time, and because that was in the 80s, and so it's different now, obviously, for second generation, but first generation Italian, girl Catholic was, in that time, it was really hard for my community to get their head around an artist. Couldn't get their heads. And my father was a beautiful self-taught musician, my mother amazing writer, but they were in this world, in Australia, a cleaner and a builder. And that's, and yet they gave me all these opportunities. And
Are you passing down that dialect and that culture to your children? Are you making sure that they...
no, and this is, it's really sad. It saddens me, but that dialect gets you into trouble in Italy. You go to...
Because of a classist
they
thing?
Straight away they go, you're Southern, you're uneducated, and you're freak because you're speaking like a 60s Neapolitan dialect. So when I go to Italy, if I'm tired and I'm in the north, I speak English, because even if I speak standard Italian, they'll hear a southern accent and they'll go, But in Naples, in my area, I'll speak the dialect, and they'll kind of go, that dialect, it's so, wow, where are you from? Like, that's crazy talk. But, or I'll speak standard. I'll try and speak my standard because they can hear southern accent to it. But you get treated like it's so classist in Italy. I mean, it's classist in Australia, but in Italy it is pure, proper, and it's unashamed. It's like, where are you from? You can't. So I just don't. I speak English. And then they treat you like royalty, Americana. It's like, for them, they kind of go, wow.
Yeah, interesting.
It's really fascinating.
There's so much historical, aspirational history, I suppose, from out of Italy with migrants, populations moving, particularly obviously to the US. That it must be interesting how that
it's really interesting because
then reflects back.
There is a certain shame as well, like that you carry and they carry when they hear, because they couldn't look after their own people. So there's a lot of Italians have a certain, but you're not a real Italian. And geographically, I was not in Italy, but I grew up, like most people from a different culture, with very different law. We were surrounded by Italians, and we spoke Italian, and we dealt with Italians, and, that was our law. And then you'd go to school and you'd, have all your Australian friends, which so many people had the same story. But when you go back to Italy, they kind of dismiss you because they feel embarrassed because their country couldn't help their own people.
Yeah.
Well, we really look forward to your play. 8 years in the making.
Oh, in the making. God, I hope it one day will come out. It'll come to fruition.
Yes, I'm sure it'll happen really soon.
No, thank you.
Thank you
really
very
exciting.
much for this chat, Lucia Mastrantone.
Yes.
And thank you, Michelle Sverdloff.
Thank
you so
guys.
much.
Next time on Closing Night Theatre Therapy. So, we meet again.
You thought you could kill me that easily? This is just the beginning. So we will launch an all-white In the Heights, an all-white Hamilton, and an all-white The Color Purple. because we believe in colorblind casting. And so as long as there are fireworks, no one will even care. Mwah!
Run for your life! Run! Save yourself! Run!
The season launch countdown has started. We're too late.
Not yet, we aren't. This is opera, and you know what they say. It ain't over until...
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Thank you, lovely listener, for spending this precious time with us today. In all these discussions about human weakness and our resilience, I hope you're able to find something that may be of inspiration. Life may not always be a bed of roses, but if you can get yourself to a theatre every now and again, I can guarantee that things will feel better, even if it's just for a couple of hours. Next week, we'll be discussing Jane E. Thompson's Fears at the Old Fitz Theatre. Catch it before it closes 13th April. This has been Susie Wrong and Nate Edmondson of Closing Night Theatre Therapy. You can subscribe to our podcast at places like Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube. If we are missing from your favorite platforms and apps, do let us know and we will find a way to get ourselves listed. Also, follow us on social media to keep in touch. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Our handle is CNTT Podcast. Like us, love us, but don't troll us. We're all here to make the world a better place. Until next time, bye.
Bye.